We're going on a journey into the unknown. And the unknown is a place that you will never experience like anything else before. Civil discussions, unpopular opinions, and most of all, it's taken place on the internet. People will say it's a myth, but today, that myth will turn into a historical fact. This is the Hot Takes for Nerds podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hot Takes for Nerds podcast. This is a podcast where we talk about divisive movies, television shows, or we just gather in our unpopular opinions about anything that's usually against the mainstream opinion. Either way, the main goal of this podcast is to talk about hot takes on certain nerd culture mediums, and I am, of course, not alone. I have a special guest who I have interacted with before on a different YouTube channel I used to have, but also someone who has done a collaboration on a particular video from this YouTube channel as well, titled, Is Captain Marvel Good or Bad? Even though we kind of think it's an okay movie. Her name is Rachel Wagner from Rachel's Reviews. How are you doing today, Rachel?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. It's StreamYard is one of those things that I'm still not used to doing, so it's a little bit it's still stressful to go ahead and do these live streams, but I'm doing actually okay.
Yeah, I mean, that intro, that made me feel really epic. I don't think I'm going to live up to it. It's very exciting.
Yeah, well, it was actually just on the fly. I didn't know, I'm not that great at coming up with, like, introductions or openings. I usually just do, like, generic things sometimes, or just say the exact same words in each episode. But I guess with that introduction, I just wanted to be honest and come from the heart and talk about, like, what civil discussions and unpopular opinions on the internet, and just have it in an epic introduction. That's basically what I like to do.
Well, I love it. And it seems like whenever you're doing a one of those Rotten Tomatoes, either uh, what do people like about some movie that people don't like, or
Mm-hmm.
what are critics saying that don't like a movie that everyone else seems like. I'm always on that one. I'm always
Oh boy.
I'm like, how is it that I always seen whether it's good or bad? I seem to always be on
Yeah,
the
that is
contrary ones of
actually
the ones you
ironic.
pick. I'm like, I promise not all my opinions are unpopular. I like a lot of things that other people
Well,
like.
my opinions are always unpopular, so I don't think you should have anything to worry about. It's oddly enough like on the negative reviews that we usually get ourselves onto, but it's also like I always like to try and do like the positive ones as well, like the Uncharted video, whether or not the critics were wrong, because that one had like a low score, and I wanted to see all the positive reviews. I wanted to get more like videos out like that. I want to continue to do making more like those videos, but apparently the negative ones get like a ton of views, so I just keep doing them.
Yeah. Well, I remember when you were talking about Beautician and the Beast.
That
And
was a long time ago.
and that's one that I have a fondness for. I enjoy it. So
Yeah. I think it was
one of
you
the
that
fresh.
I think it was you that recommended me to watch that one.
I think it's fun. But I love Fran. I'm a huge Fran Drescher fan.
Yeah,
So
you interviewed her one
twice.
time, didn't you? Interviewed her twice?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's honestly awesome.
Yeah. She's great. She's
That's a
really, really
pretty
good.
big deal, getting like a celebrity like that's been known for a long time on a podcast twice.
Twice. Yeah. It was pretty exciting.
That's
I
a big
mean,
deal.
because I have a podcast. We kind of, well, not finished, but we're like sort of on hiatus because we don't have any new stuff to cover. But I had a podcast with our friend Larry and my friend Colleen. We called the Fran Cast, where we covered every episode of The Nanny.
Hmm.
And I love doing that so much because this one it's probably my favorite show. I loved The Nanny so much, and she was doing a Lifetime movie, and I wanted to cover the Lifetime movie for Hallmark's podcast, Lifetime Christmas movie. And so we had her on for that. We were able to get her on for that. And then when I was talking to her for that interview, I told her about the Fran cast, and she's like, "Oh, I'll totally come on." And so, like 6 months later, or whatever, we were like, "Fran, we come on the, on the Fran cast," and it
It's
was
a
super
perfect
fun.
opportunity.
Yeah, she was great. She was really great. So
Oh man,
yeah, it was cool.
yeah, that's really awesome.
Hmm.
So,
So
today what we're going to be talking about is what happens when we disagree on a particular movie. And the movies that we'll be specifically talking about are going to be Turning Red and The Batman, particularly some popular movies that have come out recently, but kind of have some hot takes to spread around here. Some of us are kind of like on the some of us, like me, I would actually be on the mainstream opinion saying that I actually like the Batman and enjoy it. Rachel, I read your review. It's probably not like you hate the movie, but you're a little more negative against it
yeah, I mean, it's
than most
hard
people.
because you have to pick a side with Rotten Tomatoes, Rotten or Fresh. I was definitely on the fence about the Batman, but as
Hmm.
I was writing my review, I felt like I had more negative critiques than positive. And my biggest problem with the movie is I felt like Batman and Bruce Wayne as a character was very one note. I felt like I felt like they had sort of dark and gritty, and that was kind of it. Like we never got to see him as a complex character, as a complex human being. And that was sort of my main problem with the movie. And the movie took itself so seriously. And the thing that I get a little bit annoyed is when people hear that they think, "Oh, you wanted more jokes." No, I didn't want more jokes. I wanted human beings have lightness and darkness. They have all different side and everything in between to their personality, right? It's not
Mm.
just like "Ooh," all the time. And you want to have a dynamic, complex person. And I don't think that they gave us that. And I don't want more jokes. That doesn't have anything to do with it.
Yeah, I've seen like the route of like, uh, if you don't like a dark DC movie, it's because you like Marvel or you like jokes. That's kind of, and it's a very unfair
No.
defense to put against that person. It's kind of like
Yeah.
the opposite around. Like if you say that you don't like a Marvel movie, it's because you like DC. No, there's like a counterbalance between both of them. And
Yeah. I mean,
it's just
I really did not like Spider-Man Far From Home. If you want to see me take a Marvel movie to task, then you can see that one.
I actually want to do a discussion about that sometime on this podcast with you and some other people because it's like Spider-Man Far From Home is getting like a little bit of backlash
And I thought it was
because like it
I mean,
used to
I
be
liked
like
No Way Home
mhm,
much better, but Far From Home I thought was terrible.
yeah.
Terrible.
Like that movie has been getting it used to get like a lot of love at the beginning, but now it's
Mhm.
like when people go back and watch it, they're not really as excited when seeing that as often.
Mhm. Yeah, but I had quite a few things I did like about the Batman. I
Hmm.
really liked the kind of the crime noir feel of it. That you had the world's greatest detective aspects, I think worked pretty well. I thought the cast was all good. I really liked Jeffrey Wright as Gordon. I liked Paul Dano as the Riddler. I thought that he was good. And I actually kind of liked the third act. A lot of people I've heard said didn't like the third act, but
Yeah.
it started to get, I felt like it was at least a sort of a different note and started to go a little bit. There's like a tiny bit of camp in there in
Hmm.
that with the water and the flooding and so there are things that it started to actually get a little more entertaining to me. But overall, I just didn't love it.
Yeah. And I feel like that can actually be understanding. I think like some of your opinions are very valid and they don't necessarily go unwarned with how you feel on the movie. I think that even for some people that did really like it, I think there's somewhat of a similar opinion that with what you have, or a little bit of a problem that you have with the movie. At least with the character Bruce Wayne, some other
Yeah.
people have a problem with that as well.
I mean, he's hardly in the movie, Bruce Wayne.
Yeah, that is one thing that people would have wanted. They wanted a little bit more Bruce Wayne. I personally would have wanted a little more of Alfred because we
Yeah,
didn't really
not
get much
much.
of him in that one. and it's a different interpretation of Alfred that we haven't really seen before. And I think that Andy Serkis would have. I think that Andy Serkis didn't get to show much of that portrayal of what kind of Alfred he is in order for me to either say like, oh, he was really good, or like, I don't know about this Alfred. I kind of wish that we would have explored a little bit more of that, but I guess like if there is going to be a sequel made, maybe we'll get more of that in the near future. But
Yeah.
it's still like a little bit of a missed opportunity since this is like the first Batman movie.
Yeah. And that scene with Alfred and Bruce is probably one of the best scenes of the whole movie when he's in the hospital and they're talking about his father and everything. I think that you're starting to get some of that character development that I wanted to see, not just sort of emo Batman.
Yeah, that is a joke that a lot of people usually like to go with for Pattinson's Batman. He is pretty emo in here, but okay, let me just say what it is that I really liked about the movie. I love the visuals. I like the musky grittiness that this film has. I feel like it's one of the more darker films that shows like this where Gotham City is like a character. And when I watch like the Christopher Nolan movies, I feel like that even though that the city in here looks like a dark city, I still see like Chicago. I don't really see Gotham City. Even when it's like at the dark alleys and like being
Right.
it seems like that you're in the like the low aspects of crime. It still feels like that you're in like a city that you're familiar with. Gotham City looks like a place that I don't ever want to go to at all within the Batman, and I like how Matt Reeves portrays that. I also think that the cast did great. I personally love Pattinson's live action version of Batman, and he's personally my favorite live action version of Batman. Now with Bruce Wayne, yeah, I wish that there was like he could have been like a great Bruce Wayne, and I think that he had the potential to be like a really good one. But my problem is that like compared to like all of the other Batmans that we have seen, like Christian Bale, Affleck, or even Keaton, there's or at least like with Batman content in general, there's this two different aspect where you see Bruce Wayne, where he's the rich billionaire playboy, and you wouldn't recognize him as Batman, even though he's like a rich person. He still acts like a different character. Batman is a completely different character compared to who Bruce Wayne is. But with Pattinson, he wants to combine both of these together, and it works for the type of narrative that they're going for in this version of Batman. But the problem here is that what does make the character Batman more interesting is because he is a different character. And I think this movie would have worked if he had somewhat of an edge to be like, or tried to act like that he isn't exactly like Batman. He is trying to be Bruce Wayne and being opposed towards Batman. Like force in a little bit like a smile, even though he is going through his own personal hell. And the entire time, like you said, he is pretty much like in a broody mood, and he is pouting, and it is a little bit one note.
If you think about in Mask of the Phantasm, when there's that great scene when they are talking and he talks about he's walking the line between good and bad, right and wrong, and how worried Alfred is about him. That whole scene, I feel like that movie does the best job of kind of showing the duality of that you're talking about with Bruce and Batman. That he's walking the line, and I think that definitely we could have seen more of that. And again, it doesn't have anything to do with wanting more jokes. I really get annoyed when people say that. I think that Wonder Woman is a good example of what I look for in these kinds of characters, and where you have her being the kick butt character, you have her being the strong character, but then you also have her cooing at babies and getting ice cream cones, and like it's not a joke, but it's a softer moment. I love one of my favorite moments in Wonder Woman is the scene where they're dancing and she's talking to I forget his name, the Irish guy.
Yeah, I think
And he says,
Charlie. That's Charlie.
Charlie. And he says, and she says, well, then who would play for us?
Hmm.
Who would
I
sing for
like
us? And
that
I just think
scene.
that's such a lovely moment. And I think that we need both. You need that duality to make it feel like a fully fleshed out character.
Yeah, and that totally makes sense, and that does create more of an like again that interesting conflict is there because you want to, even though the darkness can actually create a fascinating film because that is essentially who Batman is. He's always like a character that's always within the darkness and has like these deep philosophical morals that really makes you think. There
Hmm.
is like this like conflicting side compared this conflicting side between Batman and Bruce Wayne and like things collide. Like
Hmm.
it's very confusing.
Yeah.
And I for me like uh, I know that you would feel differently about like Joss Whedon's version of Justice League, but for me, like that would be a portrayal of Batman that I really don't want to see. Like
Hmm.
inserting jokes and trying to be funny and
Right.
all that stuff. That's the type of Batman that I just don't see working at all. It feels enforced, and I.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I actually liked Zack Snyder's Justice League.
Mhm.
I thought it did a good job at like executing what it was trying to do. I certainly
Yeah,
thought it was much better than some of his other films that other people really
yeah,
enjoyed.
for me too.
I ended up liking it. I
And
gave
it's
it
a
a
film that
fresh
has
review.
some jokes in here.
Yeah, I mean, I just thought it did the best job of like creating characters that I cared about and mixing in the emotion and the action and I mean, it is what it is with his style, and it's kind of a lot for 4 hours. But overall, I felt like this was the movie we were promised, and this is what he delivered.
Yeah.
So,
Uh, I guess like another thing that I would say I kind of had a problem with the film is oddly enough somewhat of Paul Dano's performance as the Riddler, and it isn't
hmm.
like the like when the only times where I did have a problem is whenever he's shouting and screaming. It feels like he's enforcing himself to become intimidating. Like, if he's like quiet and just standing there uncomfortably so and being just he would look like a natural person that scene where he was in the diner and he had his hands up and he's just got like a little bit of a awkward pose and saying I didn't do anything, and then the police just like enforced him, and then he looked at Batman and he has like a weird smile.
Hmm.
That awkwardness and weird performance that Paul Dano gives, that's pretty good for the Riddler. But whenever he's screaming and shouting and you hear like that kind of thing, that's where it gets annoying for me, and
Yeah,
I
that's
feel
fair.
like it doesn't work.
That's fair. I mean, he was just so unhinged that I guess it didn't bother me too much because he seemed like a completely, again, unhinged character. But yeah, I mean, and I also think that, I mean, this is just a total nitpick, but I think that the riddles were kind of not the best. Like they just being those greeting cards. They could have had more fun with him, like with real riddles.
Probably, yeah.
But
I didn't think that it was like it was pretty easy to solve, if I'm pretty
yeah,
honest.
that's what I'm saying.
So I want to look at a little bit
But it
of
was
some
still
of
fun.
the negative reviews that people have had because some of the reviews that I have seen on Rotten Tomatoes, they made me question a little bit like some of the things that they're talking about because it didn't make sense, and I don't know if you
Yeah,
were able to help me out with that or not,
I'll
or if
try.
you would be able to like or if you would be able to agree with me and say like, yeah, I don't get that either. This
Hmm.
one says the Batman is a needless collage of not only better movies but more egregiously of better Batman movies as director slash co-writer Matt Reeves and co-writer Peter Gregg create an utterly inferior and infuriating vision of the Dark Knight. I guess with what this person said, they felt like that they've seen this story before, and since we're seeing this story again, it's not really that interesting
I
for
mean,
them.
I don't really feel like that is super fair because I mean, what are they going to do? Go back to the 1966? Like
Yeah,
what it's Batman. Like it's going to have yes, it's going to have things from other movies, but I don't know, I just feel like how much can you really reinvent it at this point? It's so I was fine with all of that, but it's all about for me was just more about the characters that I had
yeah.
some issues with. But teach their own.
maybe that's the case. I didn't really understand that. Well, maybe because like if you're sick and tired of seeing the exact same story over and over again, maybe that could be a little tiring and maybe it can burn you out a little bit. But for the
Hmm.
most part, what the Batman does, some of those same stories that happened within like the Nolan Keaton or even like the Michael Keaton, no, not the Michael Keaton, Kevin Conroy version of Batman, it doesn't really repeat a lot of the same stuff. It's like it's like it wants you to be aware, you know, this character,
I mean, you
and we're kind
definitely.
of
I think what he's probably referring to is it maybe is not even as much Batman, but more a lot of people said, "Oh, it's David Fincher again, it's Seven,
mm,
it's Zodiac again, this kind of thing." But that doesn't necessarily bother me. I mean, you're talking to the person who watched 125 Christmas movies, so I don't mind repetition in theme. That doesn't bother me. It's all about execution and characters for me.
right. Yeah, it does matter on execution. Like it, I think like a lot of Hollywood movies get recycled a lot, and
Hmm.
sometimes if you see like the exact same thing, it could be easy to nitpick it and say like, "Oh, that movie did it before, so this one is basically." But it's still an unfair criticism to go ahead and say to make your defense on why this movie is not necessarily that good. It should depend on like the execution and how
Yeah.
well the directing, the writing, and the acting is. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, if it's like a shot for shot, like they did with
yeah.
that Psycho remake
Hmm.
or with the Lion King remake or something like that, then yeah, that's fair. But if it's just got sort of an homage, I
Hmm.
don't think that's a problem for me. But again, each their own.
Yeah, to each their own. This person says yet another lubrious, laborious. My gosh, these are so freaking hard adjectives to read. Grim slog masquerading as a fun comic book movie.
I
This
mean, the
this
movie
one I
is
don't get.
very long. It's unnecessarily long. I can understand why she would say it's a slog.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I mean I think the grim part for me is more just that it's so repetitive in that grimness.
Hmm.
That's where it runs into problems. Not that it is grim, but it is a long movie. I mean,
Yeah, I think like that would lead in towards the other comment that I had on here, but I wanted to talk about like the fun comic book movie.
hmm
It that feels a little unfair because that's not what Batman is. He isn't necessarily
yeah,
like a jokester. He's his essential point of being a character. His nature is darkness. I mean, sure, you can have like some lighter moments in the film, and maybe that would make it a little more interesting. But then again, like if you're saying like this isn't a fun comic book movie because it doesn't have like any jokes, which I saw a lot on Rotten Tomatoes for the reasons why they didn't like it.
see,
It's
that's where I'm saying
odd.
though. A lot of people will. I've heard people say that. Oh, you just want more jokes. But if you actually read the review, most of the
Hmm.
time, that's not what they're saying at all. And I feel like people are putting that out as like a straw man argument that's saying, like, oh, this critic, all they want is more jokes. No, that's not what we want. We want, or a lot of us that had criticisms of the film don't want more jokes. We want nuanced characters that are developed.
Hmm.
That's
Okay.
my that's the frustration that I felt. But
Hmm.
but I have to say that I was pretty nervous because I've had bad experiences in the past with comic book movies and unpopular opinions. And I have to say that this experience was very positive. I didn't have comments on my review. And when I tweeted it out, I only allowed my friends to respond. So I think that maybe helped. But I'm grateful. No death threats. Yay.
Yeah, that's a good thing. That's a very good thing.
Thank you. But yeah, it's tough because I do on one hand I feel frustration because people are like, "Oh, it's comic book accurate." I'm like, "Is Frank Miller the only comic book? Is that the only Batman we're
No, there
gonna
have been
make
like
movies at?"
definitely
There's all
different
different kinds of
interpretations.
Batman. Like, why don't we try something different? We feel like, or just slightly different. Why does it have to always be that version?
Yeah. And that's very interesting that like like you would say that it's just the uh brief summary that some people would look on Rotten Tomatoes, and what you're saying is that some people just take that out of context, and some reviews are actually not saying that. They're saying like, no, it's not like we want more jokes. We're saying that there's like we don't want this to be just one noted.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between saying it's like this last one that you had where she's talking about
Hmm.
it being a not being a fun comic book movie. That doesn't mean she necessarily wants more jokes.
Okay.
Like to me, there's a difference, but that's just me.
I think I think I have seen, maybe that wasn't the best
Like I was
comment that I
using the
had actually
example with
saw.
Wonder
Yeah.
Woman, where
Hmm.
there's lightness in like a scene where they're dancing or when she's cooing, with a baby. That's not a joke. That's just a lighter moment of the character where you get to know her better.
Maybe. Maybe it's the way that we
I don't
usually
know.
read these brief summaries, because it is important to like read the full article and what they are saying, and
Mhm.
that's usually what my
You see what I'm
videos
saying
sometimes
though?
are. Yeah.
Like about
Yeah.
Wonder Woman?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so this one said the problem that this the problem that the problem is that the movie, which hampers its value with a bloated runtime of 176 minutes, never feels fresh, original, or essential. And that right there would be about like the time limit. Do you think like the
Yeah.
time does actually hinder on the movie being good, or is it because I did I watched it like twice, and there were only like a couple of moments where I'm like, okay, the time is getting on my nerves, but then there were other moments where I wasn't really feeling bored that much.
Mhm.
I don't really know if like the
I think it definitely could have been trimmed down. I think it's definitely self-indulgent at times, and it's repetitive in certain scenes that you're like, "Okay, this scene does not need to be going on this long." That is especially the last third, even though I enjoyed that part the most, I don't know, there's a lot of, like, long montages of the city and the when the water's coming in and yeah, you need some of that, but I don't know, the whole movie could have been trimmed, I think, quite a bit.
yeah, that's probably true.
I know, but that's true with almost all superhero movies are too bloated these days. I mean, true definitely with Marvel. I mean, almost all
Yeah,
the MCU movies could use a good cut.
some of them probably would. Well, there's like a distinct line between like let a moment linger in and then have that
Mhm.
moment sink in, and sometimes you would need that time limit in order for you to let that to get that feeling and that impact that the movie is trying to let you feel. But then there
Yeah.
are like other moments where you're like, can you actually trim this down and still get that moment in, even though you're trying to like you have a runtime of how long you want your audience to stay in the theater.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I don't know if there's like anything else to talk about with like the Batman. It's just sometimes when people have like different opinions on it, or it's very odd when people, especially like DC films, it gets pretty toxic whenever somebody just doesn't really care for the movie or doesn't like the movie, even though a lot of other people would say the exact opposite. Like, I'm not necessarily a huge fan of Man of Steel, but a lot of people really liked it. And
Yeah.
sometimes
I'm
their
with you
defense
there.
on, yeah, and sometimes the defense would be like, oh, you just want like more humor or more jokes, but no, that's not necessarily the case. It's just that I want like a that movie I feel like should be a lot better being fleshed out and more. I don't really feel like it was about Superman. It was more focused on like all of the other stuff, even though they could have made an interesting film. I
Yeah.
feel like that because they're wanting to be a psychological analysis on Superman, it didn't really give us that much devotion to it since it's like
Mhm.
focusing on a lot of other stuff.
Yeah. The it's a movie that's full of ideas that
Hmm.
are interesting, but executed frustratingly for me. Like for instance, I don't have any problem with the fighting, the violence between uh in the end, the last act. I have a problem with just how unending it is. Like we go through all of Smallville and have all of that destruction. And then we're in Metropolis, and then it keeps going and keeps going and it keeps going till by the time he snaps Zod's neck, I'm just done. I don't care anymore. I'm over it. And so that's the problem with, and people are like, oh well, he's doing it. I agree, he's doing it for those reasons. It's just too much. It's too long. It's just the same point over and over and over again. By the time you get to, at least for me, by the time you get to this supposedly climactic moment, I'm just not invested anymore. It's I don't know, not for me.
Yeah, the action could be going on for a long periods of time.
Yeah.
Sometimes I don't like the way that it was directed in terms of how Snyder shot the action as well. I think like he could have done a. He's usually great as a visionary director, and I feel like Batman v Superman, at least in terms of the visuals, was better directed. With
he
how
was
did
really
that.
trying. Yeah, I agree. He was really trying, I think, for the Nolan aesthetic in Man of Steel, and I think that kind of held it back a little bit. It's very kind of gray and very.
It definitely held it back.
Yeah. Whereas in Batman v Superman, it is definitely more his aesthetic, for better or worse, depending on how you feel. But yeah, another example in Batman v Superman, the whole Martha moment. In theory, and all these videos explaining this is why he did it, and this is why it's great. I get it, and I think that could be interesting. The idea of them having the same name, and him calling to mind, his humanity. And I understand all of that. The way it was executed was clunky and silly and made you laugh because it was so ridiculous. I mean, you have a character who's been training for literally months for this one moment, and a name is going to make him like stop the way it does. It's just, and then all of a sudden they're like best friends.
Yeah, that's just odd.
It's just not well done.
Yeah. It's a very odd thing with like fan bases. They usually tend to say, you just don't get this because so and so, this is how this is supposed to work out. But sometimes we're like, no, I get that. I don't like the way that the film is executed. And that's usually a lot of why people tend to agree to disagree. It is about like execution with like writing or directing or anything that's in the film usually. It does depend on like execution, but that's a lot with like, especially with like DC fans. They could be hardcore and talk about like how you're wrong on this because this is exactly how it's supposed to be. And you can find that with a lot of movies like Suicide Squad. A lot of people used to defend that film hardcore and were like signing petitions to like ban Rotten Tomatoes just so that they can like get them off the air because of how low the rating was. But again, then all of a sudden there's like a change of opinion, and now people say like that's one of the worst movies in the DC extended universe. It's the type of fan bases that usually go about their way to say like, I don't know, it's crazy.
I would really like people to seriously ask this question. This I said in my review. So I said, the story is extremely one note and doesn't develop characters we care about or become emotionally invested in. They put the pieces together for the case, but that's fairly predictable and bland. And this is the key I think people need to ask themselves. If this was just a generic detective movie without the iconic IP, I don't think there would be much interest in the story or characters. So if this was just Robert Pattinson in film noir reboot movie, in the Maltese Falcon, let's just say, whatever, and it was almost exactly the same movie with the same pacing, the same script, the same, you just had a serial killer instead of it being the Riddler. You just had a generic detective instead of it being Batman. Would you like this movie? And I don't know. I mean, not that long ago there was I can't think of the name of the movie, but that one with Denzel Washington and Jared Leto.
And The Little Things, is that it?
Yeah, very similar in a lot of ways to this movie. Definitely has a Fincher aesthetic. It definitely is about a detective putting the clues together. It's about a serial killer. It's very similar, and most people hated that movie and thought it was trash and were upset when Jared Leto got nominated for Golden Globe. So I don't know. I think that people need to ask themselves that question.
Yeah, that is definitely a good question because I did ask myself this as well, and that's the same thing. I think people have actually used this defense with the movie Joker. If
Hmm.
they weren't to have like that specific character in this style of a movie, would they still like the film? And I don't know if this is because like this movie is still relying a lot upon the fact that they're saying you know who the character of Batman is and you know who these characters are, so we're just going to go ahead and not really tell you their origin story and just throw these characters in this kind of situation with this type of scenarios. So, and I asked myself, like, would I still like this movie even if like Batman and all these other characters were not in the film? And I wouldn't say that I would love it, to be honest, because but I would still say that it's still somewhat of a solid film because
Hmm.
it's still shot really nice and it still has some nice dialogue in here to keep myself interested. Like,
Hmm.
there's some good monologues that Pattinson did have in here, and
Yeah, it's not a terrible film. I enjoyed things about it.
yeah,
I was very on the fence actually of what I how I felt. So,
yeah. You
it's
said that
tough.
this was like a very mixed film for you. Yeah.
If they had a like ripe tomato or something like that, like
Yeah.
an in between, I don't know, like a kind of ripe tomato. If there was a middle ground, this would totally be my middle ground for sure.
Rotten Tomatoes just seems to be like a thumbs up, thumbs down situation, and
Yeah.
you can't necessarily figure out what's the middle ground.
Yeah, I mean, you do. You have to pick a side. I even said that in my review. I said, I have to pick a side. So,
Hmm. Yeah, it's pretty
but
difficult to do.
now, I mean, the
uh,
other movie we're going to talk about, Turning Red, I definitely had more negative feelings about.
yeah, that
I was
one.
more on the Ron side, which
Yeah,
is
that one for me
unpopular.
as well. Uh-huh. It's very uncomfortable for me to talk about that one as well. Well, I had to like watch the film twice in order for me to figure out like, do I actually feel that way, or what is this
Hmm.
movie trying to talk about? And then I had to come to the conclusion that maybe I don't necessarily care for that movie that much. But as for like my closing thoughts on like the Batman, I personally really like it. I have a few gripes with it. I don't consider it to be like the best Batman movie of all
Hmm.
time. I think like as say I definitely think Batman Begins, Mask of the Phantasm, Dark Knight are kind of better than this one because they portray a more interesting version of how Batman is. Um but I would say that like the Batman is still like a pretty good and solid film um even though you and I would probably say that there's still you and I would still have like some opposite opinions. It doesn't mean that we could still see some of the reasons why we like it
Sure.
and dislike it, though.
I would say it's a solid mixed bag. It's good things and bad things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
So,
so now we're gonna move on towards Turning Red. Now, before we go ahead and talk about Turning Red, I want to go ahead and take you guys on a little bit of a trip on why I created this YouTube channel and how it segues into what we're talking about with Turning Red.
all right.
My ambition for this YouTube channel and this podcast, as a matter of fact, is to find honesty, truth, and what people have to say on a particular movie that isn't a part of the mainstream opinion. I'm not looking for people to hate or love it for the sake of rebelling against the majority's popular opinion. I want to create a community where we can have civil discussions and be honest about the movies we feel when watching them. Even though it's the internet and we can't stop trolls or bullies from targeting people, suggesting us to not listen to them because we don't understand how filmmaking works or what is a good movie because of our personal taste, I want to do the best that I can to decrease that kind of toxicity on my channel and increase respecting people's opinions and make interesting conversations. The way that I see this is that if you have an unpopular opinion on a particular movie, I see it as fascinating because I'm able to understand more about what you like, how you look at movies. I gain more knowledge, and you get to learn more about them when we both view something but have different interpretations of it. I've had constant unpopular opinions on movies, television shows, video games, etc., and this channel helps me express out those opinions and look for anybody else who would feel the exact same way as I do. But even if that isn't the case, that's just as okay because the main goal is to see, know, and understand the different perspectives of where people are coming from and understand what they're talking about. So even if I do have an unpopular opinion on a franchise or whatever, and someone who sees it differently discusses why they don't see it the way I see it, I can find that helpful or insightful. I can gain or learn something that I haven't thought of before. It's great to see that you're not alone on a movie and someone does feel the same way you do, but it's also just as good, in my opinion. And also, you can gain more when somebody has the opposite opinion. That's pretty much the way that I see it on how we should look at movies and talk to others about it. Like, for example, like just what we talked about with the Batman. Like, I said that there are some reviews on here that are saying like some critics are saying like they want jokes or that they want some stuff in here, but Rachel like stopped me and said like, no, I think like it's a little bit of a misinterpretation, and some people are wanting to say that they want more than just a one note character. Like some of the reviews are probably saying that, and that made me insightful, and it actually changed my perspective on the way that I would usually see, not just on movies, but how people would usually take in movies. That right there, I find to be insightful and I find to be encouraging. So I encourage other people to go ahead and speak out what it is that they see on particular movies, particular reviews, on how they take in certain situations and what's going on with the way that they view film. That's the way that I see it.
Yeah, I agree. I well said. I think that's very true, and I think that we become more interesting people when we interact with other humans and we get to see their perspective and learn, and when we don't take things so personally. I mean, sometimes I think we take things more personally than the people who even made the artwork. That
Hmm.
you're, if you don't like it, you're insulting me and who I am, and that's just usually not the case.
Yeah. Like people really like to take movies personally. I think somehow with criticism or criticizing a film, it's evolved a lot more personal than it used to be. Sometimes
Mhm.
we would just talk about movies and we'd say like, "Did you like it or did you not like it?" And we'd say, "I liked it. No, I didn't like it," and that's fair enough. But now it's like people have like these feelings and these huge attachments to the film where if you attack them, it's attack the movie, it's like you're attacking them now.
Mhm.
It's kind of
Yeah.
like that's the way that I'm seeing it. And I don't know
Mhm.
if we should like I don't think it's a good idea to go towards that route because sometimes you have to be understanding that movies are art and they're not necessarily interpreting the way that you would the way that you're taking it in because some people would view it differently than others.
Mhm.
And I think that's like an important aspect of how you're viewing these things. You need to view it the way that you should treat other types of art
Mhm.
mediums like paintings and drawings. You should take it like on like one person would be able to take it into one aspect, but another person would see it something completely different. That's how I think we should be able to view movies the way that they should be, instead of saying like
Yeah.
it's exactly this, and if you're attacking that, then you're attacking me.
Right. I agree.
Yeah. So this is how I was going to transfer over towards Turning Red because it's I didn't know what to think of this movie when I first saw the trailers. It seemed fascinating for Pixar to go ahead and go for this kind of ambition to like, talk about puberty and talk about like something this personal. It's like a big risk because Pixar doesn't usually go for well, they do go for like some personal stuff, but not like this close in my eyes. They have talked about like your emotions and your feelings like Inside Out. They talked
Mhm.
about how you feel. And then there's like Soul where they talk about like how how great life is or something more philosophical like that. And but with Turning Red, they're now taking it to more of like a it's more specific. Like they're talking about puberty, but through a specific lens towards like what gender you are. And some people would I've seen like a couple of reviews where they said that it isn't that niche. It is pretty much talking about like growing up. Yes, there's that, but it's kind of hard to come around that when they are talking about specific
So
genders.
I celebrated the fact that it was an Asian young girl. I celebrated the fact that they were talking about things like getting your period and
Hmm.
puberty. All of that I think was great. I think that we need more of that. We need to not have girls be shamed when they start their period, and it'd be
Hmm.
something that they're horrified by. Like, we need to do better as a culture. My problem is kind of similar to what I was saying about execution. I like those things in concept, but the problem was I thought that the whole metaphor with the panda was incredibly muddy. It didn't really make sense to me. If this is supposed to be if this is supposed to be a comparison to puberty, and yet she says my panda, my choice. I don't That doesn't
Yeah.
make sense to me. You can't control puberty. You don't have a
Yeah.
choice. It just
That doesn't.
happens. Your period just happens. You don't have a choice. And there's this whole ritual which I do not understand the ritual. So the ritual is supposed to give them the opportunity to embrace the panda or not embrace the panda. But her mom went through the ritual, got rid of the panda, but then she can bring it back at any time. So what's the point
Hmm.
of the ritual? And then she brings it back at the end, and but then she can Mei Ling can bring the goes through the ritual, but doesn't decide to get rid of the panda. I don't know. It made no sense to me, and I also think it's really weird that this is like a real religion, and yet they're adding this like ritual. Like, how is that not cultural appropriation? Like, if you use your name as an example, as a counterexample, your name used actual rituals within the story from the Shinto religion that actually exist. There's the sake ritual, there's the red band, all of those things actually exist. They're part of that religion, right? But
Hmm.
there obviously is no red panda ritual because it doesn't exist. So, but I don't. I just think that's so weird, and I haven't heard anybody else bring that point up. And I think it's very strange that they just. It's not like it's Raya where it's a fake religion, fake culture, right? This is real. Her parents run a temple and they have this ritual and they're and I just the ritual didn't make any sense to me and the metaphor didn't work. I don't understand it. And then when she says my panda my choice, what? I don't know. So that's where it lost me is I just thought that and then I thought there were really weird moments like when she is kind of being I don't know, like used for this bullies party as
Hmm.
like a an attraction. I thought that was weird. That if this is an eighth grader, why are they having these kinds of parties? Like, I don't know. That's
It's
something I definitely don't connect with. And then her mother was unhinged,
yeah.
like crazy. I mean, what she
Hmm.
does when she bursts into that convenience store and shows all of
Yes.
May's drawings to that guy Devin. I mean,
Hmm.
that was just crazy.
This is
But
where I started to have a problem with the film
like,
because I was
what
getting
parent
confused.
would do that? And I remember I watched the documentary on Amy Tan, who wrote the Joy Luck Club last year, and she was saying how she got tons of pushback in for the Joy Luck Club way the way that the mothers were portrayed. That there was this cliched. It was that because there's these overbearing kind of Asian mothers in the book in slash movie, and that was like nothing compared to and this is 2022, that was like 92. You think that in 30 years we'd have more nuanced depictions of Asian mothers, and I thought
Hmm.
that was so just cringy. I can't think of a way to describe it. I thought the mother was cringe.
Yeah. Even it was like I was so nervous to talk about the mother because I was afraid if some people would probably say like it's just a part of their culture. This is what the mother does. But I'm like, why should that be an excuse for a mother that goes this crazy though? I don't
No,
feel like that would really make any
like there
excuse
is
though.
no
There still
sensible
needs to
way
be
she could have.
likability.
Yeah, there's no sensible way she could have possibly thought her storming in like that would have been some kind of a positive experience for this for her daughter. I mean, and also her character doesn't make sense anyway because if you knew that your daughter was going to be experiencing this panda thing and wouldn't you give her a heads up? Wouldn't you say like this is coming? This is what you're going
Yeah,
to be
that
dealing with? They're supposedly so close and she's never mentioned it.
I don't know. Maybe they I have to assume that maybe they thought that once again, we didn't know this was going to happen like so soon. They probably were just like waiting a little bit. But again, she's like in the 8th grade. So I guess they
Yeah.
could have told her in the 6th grade or maybe even
Yeah.
lesser than that. But
It's it's crazy. And I don't know. I mean, the boy band stuff was kind of fun. I enjoyed
I
that, but I feel like it would have been more fun if the movie wasn't set in 2002, if it was set currently and you could have had K-pop be in the movie. I know it's, Korea, not China, but still, you could have had like BTS be that would have been, I think, a fun way to bring in the culture as opposed to this white boy band,
probably. It probably, yeah, that would actually make a lot more sense.
right?
Uh, for, for me, like this movie, I like that Pixar again is like trying to be ambitious and going for these creative choices and is wanting to be a little bit more personal. And even though this like Pixar is a brand where they want to do like family friended content, it's they always like to bring out messages that are meaningful and can impact other people. Like they've done that
Mhm.
even without going through the human perspective. They did that with Toy Story and talking about like growing up and how things don't always last forever. They also talked about with Finding Nemo and dealing with like
Yeah.
parent loss and parental control. They've done that with like they've been creative with this. So like it seems like that Pixar is trying to evolve a little bit more and not necessarily always stick towards that kind of way of creating animated films and doing a little bit more with like human characters. Like they did that with Soul and they did what with Luca. But even with like Soul and Luca, they have like a little bit more of creative imagination within
Mhm.
those films than Turning Red did. The only thing that's creative is just like her turning into like a red panda.
Mhm.
And so I
Yeah,
give
and
them
it's supposed to be something that connects so much with young teens, but I don't think that I would connect with it, at least because, again, getting back to the idea of choice, the big lesson for Mei Ling is that she chooses to embrace the panda, whereas these teens, they don't get a choice. They just have it happen. So I don't really think that it would connect with me that much to
yeah,
to be able to say she can choose or not choose, because again, they can't choose. And so I don't know. I
this is
think
the
it just
thing that
missed.
this is something like it's a great it's like what you said before. I think like this movie has like a huge problem on understanding the story thematically and then systematically because they understand the theme of what they're trying to go for, but the metaphor of like what they're talking about with the panda, which is supposed to be about puberty, is not. It's a little bit vague because
Yeah.
sometimes you have to understand like it's about her growing up, and then sometimes she might get her period, and then there are other times where she might like different things, but they don't necessarily address is that how it works when you have the panda because she liked stuff like that even before she had this panda though.
Hmm.
And then they would look at it systematically and say, and this is where the movie just starts getting a little weird for me. With the mother and the daughter relationship, they talk about how like, don't worry, we can get through this. Like you naturally feel these things. It's okay. It's a part of growing up. But then there are like these other moments where the mother says like, this is very dangerous. You know how much this can affect your life. And I'm like, it's a it's not unnatural for people to go ahead and like boy bands. It makes sense systematically about like her turning
Hmm.
into a panda and then she's supposed to be a human. I mean, like if she's a panda and everybody else is a human, that would be weird. But it's not
Hmm.
unnatural for her to like boy bands and
Yeah,
when you're
just
talking
like,
about it in puberty and stuff like that. This is things that everybody else has
yeah,
within
and
their lifestyle. So I don't understand. It seems like very confusing with what they're talking about in terms of creating a story for this.
yeah, the ritual did not make sense. And again, it's totally normal for girls to have crushes on boys and for her to draw in her sketchbook, and for her mom to behave this way is just ridiculous. And I mean, it's not something that I mean, I had a sane mother, so I couldn't connect to it.
Yeah.
I and I don't know, it just fell flat for me. I didn't like it. I thought I was
Yeah.
gonna love it. I had the image of Mailing in the Panda on as my wallpaper after the movie was announced. I thought it looked so charming and so sweet for like a year. I had it as my wallpaper on my phone. And so I was really excited about this movie. And I don't know, for me at least, this is the first one I've gone rotten on, but I feel like Pete Docter's tenure as president of Pixar, the movies have been pretty messy. And I think that Soul was beautiful and it had
Hmm.
good moments, but I think it was also pretty messy. The whole section with the cat, I
Yeah.
think, was a miss. I didn't care for that. Luca is gentle and sweet and fine,
Hmm.
but a little bit, I would say, a little messy as well, especially anything involving the race. Like it's just not. I don't know. Um, and then what am I forgetting? Soul, Turning Red, Luca, Onward. Onward is
Onward.
also kind
Yeah.
of messy
Yeah, it was.
in the lore and setting up the story and everything with the dad and uh, so I guess that's where they're going now. Is they're going for sort of big ideas, kind of messy execution.
Sort of. That does seem like where they're kind of at. I think like another big problem that I have is that if you are wanting to talk about a topic like this personal, I think it would be best if they just don't really become this funny. Because it seems like Turning Red is trying really hard to go ahead and say these other jokes. Like they have period jokes and all the other stuff that
Yeah.
they do with the metaphor of the panda.
Well, even
But
the name is kind of a pun, which is a little bit on the nose. Turning Red.
yeah, I didn't even think about that. That's
Yeah.
so. But with jokes like this, it's like you gotta have like a mature style to it. To be honest, if you're going to talk about something
Hmm.
this personal and this serious, and it looks like that Pixar wants to do like what other live action coming of age movies are pretty much doing, where they are
Yeah.
including like some of the raunchiness but mixed with the Pixar fluffiness. That doesn't work for me,
Yeah.
if
I
I were to
agree.
be honest. Like you gotta, if you're doing a story like this, even though you're Pixar and you want to insert like some amount of humor and be cute and fluffy, you gotta tone down some of the. You gotta be mature with what you're doing, and you gotta tone down some of the jokes that you're telling. And I felt like that with the jokes in here, they were mostly awkward and uncomfortable, and it didn't work for me. And maybe it's
Hmm.
also because like, and some people would probably say like it's because you're a guy and you're not a girl, but I don't feel like that's warranted a little bit because I know girl characters from Disney that I like and are hyperactive and and I actually do enjoy their presence on screen. I've seen Gravity Falls. I've seen Star vs. the Forces of Evil. I
Yeah, that's a
like
good
these
example.
characters and they're highly hyperactive characters, to be honest.
Hmm.
And
Well, I enjoyed Over the Moon. I don't know if you got to see that one on Netflix. About it's quite a bit of similarities about a girl and I think Korean girl. Um, I can't remember, or maybe Chinese. Anyway, about a girl who is missing her mom. Her mom has passed away. Ends up going on this ride to the moon. That one I enjoyed. Abominable, which is also about a Chinese girl from this was from DreamWorks that find this mysterious creature. I enjoyed that. I thought that was sweet. So there's a lot of other films. If you want one that's specifically about that has a scene about the period from Studio Ghibli, Only Yesterday is a very good one. It's kind of a slice of life movie. It feels almost like a documentary, but it's beautifully animated, and there's a whole section of that movie about the character getting her period. I recommend
mm,
that one much more than this.
yeah, okay. I haven't seen them yet, but maybe I can watch them.
Hmm.
Even if they were like, I know that it's like Gravity Falls and Star vs. the Force of Evil, they have a much more interesting narrative than like Turning Red, so maybe that's why I enjoy the characters from those
Yeah.
shows more than this one. But still, Turning Red's characters are only focused on just again the boy band Four Town, and that's pretty much it. That's basically
Yeah.
it that their characters are. And I know it's like Pixar has a way of making you like characters without saying like their backstory, giving their backstories, or they have a way of making you like the characters just by how cute and likable they are. They just have like a likable personality.
Hmm.
And with the personalities with these characters, they with Turning Red, all they have is just like again this liking boys and liking boy bands and I know it's a movie about like going through puberty and you're liking stuff that your mother probably won't approve, but there's got to be more than this. Like, she has other qualities. She's a smart person. Does she actually want to be smart, or is it just her mother that's wanting to do that? Or is there like other
Hmm.
qualities to her character that makes this like a little bit more fascinating and a little bit more mature that you would actually want to get into? Like, we have like all this other stuff in here that the movie could actually focus on, but it's like they mostly just want to focus on boy bands and liking boys, and I
Yeah,
don't
there's
know.
more to it. Yeah, like I said, the whole plot with the bully birthday party I thought was really strange. That was weird.
Yeah,
And my biggest problem was just I thought the metaphor was poorly executed, poorly handled. It
yeah,
didn't make sense to me.
yeah. And even though like I know that I'm a guy, and even, maybe it's because I don't know. It's so weird to go ahead and try and criticize this movie because some people would probably say it's because you're a guy and not a girl. Like all they do is talk about like boy bands and stuff like that. But again, like it feels like that you could still do more though, and
Yeah.
maybe like little girls can say like they can enjoy this movie for the sake of what they're doing, and they can be able to easily relate to it more than I can, and that's perfectly fine if they enjoy the movie just for the sake of that and they're able to have fun with it. Fine, okay, like that's what they can like. But if for watching a movie and for a movie on its own footing, I personally do think that this movie could have done better in order to create like a more memorable character and a more like likable character with what the film does. And I don't feel like that it did it quite much. I would say this: I like Jin. I like Mei Mei's dad. I feel like that he was cool.
Yeah, he was fun. He was fun.
Yeah,
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
I mean,
So,
again, I like that it tried to do some other stuff with like the animation. I feel like the anime
yeah, I enjoyed the animation.
choices, the animation, it's definitely got effort, but some of like the choices to be a little bit like anime, like a particularly one scene where she I would say it's a funny joke because she was like drawing all these pictures of like the boys she had a crush on a little bit, and then tried to hide the notebook when her mother was trying to come in, and then the animation was going a little crazy and zooming in on her face. There's effort within that animation, and they're clearly trying something new, but it's just like seeing that within Pixar as a family branded film, it's awkward for me.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I agree.
Yeah. So there are some other like positive reviews that I could be able to share for the movie Turning Red, and I want to see if what our thoughts on with these. That's
Yeah, so were gonna ask me my underrated, overrated. Is that right?
I was gonna see if I could be able to like look at. Well, I guess it was. Well, all right. I was gonna share like these reviews that were supposed to be on here for Turning Red, but apparently they're not on there. So I guess I gotta have to do like that share screen thing again. I'm new to this, guys, in case you didn't recognize it. Okay, there it is. This is what the review says. It says the story of Mei as a 13-year-old Chinese Canadian girl who transforms into a giant red panda whenever she gets too emotional. Mei has an interesting relationship with her overbearing mother in which she always does what her mother tells her to do, but never expresses how she feels about those things because she doesn't want to disappoint her, so she just stays quiet. They seriously have communication problems. She becomes so obsessed with her mother's approval that she even has to repress her own emotions and identity. Therefore, transforming into the red panda is a way of releasing her inner beast in order to find her true self while also finding the courage to defend her true self. At the same time, we get to understand why her mother Ming acts the way she does since she had a similar experience with her own mother whilst growing up. Ming's redemption arc is exceptionally well crafted. Do you feel like that? What do you think about this? Do you think like it makes sense with what this person is saying, or do you feel like there's still some problems with Ming's character arc?
Yeah, I mean, some people have said that it's about emotions, not about puberty. I think again it gets pretty muddy, pretty and I think the enjoyment of this film really depends on whether you're willing to sort of embrace the imperfect metaphor. If you don't mind, if you kind of go with it, then you'll probably enjoy it. But yeah, I mean, she she does, I guess that's her when she says my panda, my choice, that she's choosing to be, I guess, one with her emotions or something like that. But even then, I feel like the metaphor doesn't really work because uh, emotions, you can't really choose them. I mean, that's kind of a mistake that some people say that, like, why are you being so depressed? Snap out of it, kind of a thing. No, that's not the way
Hmm.
depression
Yeah.
works. Like,
Yeah.
it just happens, and then you have to learn how to mitigate it, deal with it, sometimes medicate it, whatever it might be. And so I guess that is technically a choice, but I don't know. I feel like it's a eh, it's not really truthful to say that we can, like, if we embrace our depression, then then the world is going to be great.
No, it
That's
won't.
not the way that it works. It
Yeah,
So even
that
on an emotion level, for me, the metaphor did not work. It did not make
yeah,
sense to me. It was not well crafted. I disagree with this person, but
yeah.
to each their own.
I mean, it's like it feels like that this person, if it looks like that they were coming up with somewhat of a point, but again, it's like this metaphor with the red panda is still getting lost in translation on what that metaphor is.
Hmm.
So it's like it's still confusing, and it opens up still more plot holes on why are these characters still feeling this way. So why doesn't the panda work in like other specific situations? And it's like again that systematically versus thematically situation with the narrative. So yeah, I guess to each their own.
Yeah.
This one said like all of this definitely okay. So turning red feels like it is punching down at its characters, but is told from a perspective that can look back and laugh at what feels like a teenage apocalypse. This extends not only to both the cultures and traditions that are central to the story, but also the other half of its central metaphor, menstruation. I'm not sure how many other PG films tackle the subject other than My Girl, but the directionness of the approach here is admirable. This is something that happens to roughly half of the world's people, and yet most of what I knew about it as a young teen was from television commercials with blue liquids. It's about time we all grew up a little and made it more visible.
I agree that I think it is time we grow up and we made it more visible and we had conversations. Like, it is kind of crazy that I can only think of two movies that directly kind of talk about menstruation. Like I
Hmm.
said, Only Yesterday has it in there, and then also there's a short on um, called Period End of Sentence on Netflix. That's a documentary that's quite good about a it's India and a village that actually starts producing their own maxi pads and
Mm.
starts in. So that one's actually quite good, but that is crazy. But I don't think this movie does a good job of that. That's the problem I have. I
Yeah, that's
admire that. I think that that's a worthy goal. I think that, but again, this metaphor of the panda and it being some kind of choice doesn't make sense to me. Period is not a choice. A period just happens.
yeah.
I mean, I wish it was a choice. I think all girls wish it was a choice, but I so I so
Yeah, that joke just
to
doesn't
me,
work. It
May's
seems like
dilemma isn't helpful. Like, if I was a girl trying to deal with my period, I just don't understand how this movie has is helpful to that.
yeah, it looks like the jokes in here just don't work. It looked like they're trying to be more so relevant to what's going on today, and then just insert these jokes to say like, well, we're kind of being raunchy, so we got to throw this joke in here, and we're for kids, so that's kind of smart, right? And it feels like they're just trying too hard to be funny rather than actually
I don't know. I just
make a
feel like
mature
they
movie.
had the concept, but they just didn't get the story right. They kind
It's
of
like
stopped
where
at concept.
it's like the positives would focus more on admiring the ambition rather than like explaining why the execution
Yeah.
is good. instead. That seems to be the problem here
Another
with this
good
show.
example of a it's a TV show, but the recent Babysitters Club have really good episodes
Uh,
about the characters and their periods and things like that. So that one I recommend. But uh, I don't know. I guess our girls just supposed to be like, well, it's my choice to have to like my period. I guess it's a choice. What? It just happens, and girls just have to. I
yeah,
don't understand it.
it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But
I
this is the
mean,
last one.
I mean, I know we don't like to talk about Cosby Show anymore, but there was actually a really great episode of the Cosby Show where Rudy gets her period, and they have a tradition, girls' night, where she skips girls' day where they skip school when you get your period, and they go and do something fun. And so all the other
Hmm.
sisters have had it, and so the mom, Claire Huxtable, is kind of excited when she finds out about Rudy, and Rudy's like, "No, I don't want to do anything." And she finally starts talking, and she's like, "This was terrible. This was the worst." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's right. That's accurate." That episode is a very good episode. If you want something that talks about periods in like an honest way, and they by the end kind of they end up having their fun day, and it's a really good episode
Yeah.
of television as far as that topic.
Yeah. There's a good way to execute it and there's a bad way.
Hmm.
That's pretty much the summary of that.
Yeah, but like the thing was, instead of it being like you have a choice in the Cosby episode, it was, it sucks and you're right. It's not great. It's okay that you feel that way. I
Yeah.
validate your choice. I don't know.
And
I
that's a
think that's a
better
lot better.
explanation to do it than what the movie has decided to do. It seems like this movie is just confused again, like lost in translation with
Yeah.
what the metaphor is. So
Yep.
the last one that actually is here is saying fundamentally good and ultimately super rich in every sense of the word. Turning Red is mainly about inter intergenerational trauma, which is a topic that gets rarely talked about in animated films, but director Dong Shi doesn't stop. I hope I pronounced that name right. Did I say it right?
I think so. I'm not
Okay.
sure, but
Okay. Doesn't stop there and even goes through exploring puberty, family relationships, and defining its own limit. Some would call the film too specific for a certain target audience. I would instead call it genuinely refreshing and bold.
I do think that the relatability argument is weak. It does not matter that the movie is not relatable as far as my life. I have very little in common with May as a character. That doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I have tons of movies that I love that have nothing. I have no commonality at all. Nothing.
No,
I mean, I
we don't
love
relate to
Moonlight,
Batman.
and I love Moonlight, and I have nothing in common with Sharon at all. There's tons, and so it doesn't. The relatability argument is stupid. It's about the
Yeah.
script, and did the characters and the story work for you, and did you become invested in this? And some people did, and some people didn't. So most people
Yeah.
seem to have. But there you
Yeah.
go.
That's basically the same situation that I am in with that. I think like I mean it is like you can easily like a movie more if you do relate to it, but I don't think that would excuse it for being a great film, in all honesty. It
Hmm.
does depend upon like execution and writing, directing and acting. So that's the way that I've seen it with the movie Turning Red, and especially with like all type of movies. It does depend a lot on execution, whether or not it's relatable or not relatable. You can have a movie that can be relatable and it still sucks, in
Yeah,
all
that's true
honesty.
too. That's a good point.
So,
Yeah.
now that you had your final say on like Turning Red and everything.
Mhm. Yeah. I
Okay.
think we
All right.
covered it.
So I guess we've actually reached towards the end of this podcast, and now we're talking. Before we end the podcast, I usually do this with everything, with all of the podcast episodes that I do. I ask my guests, and I also do this as well. What is an underrated and overrated film that you would like to share on the episode? And that's just the usual thing to keep up with the theme of Hot Takes for Nerds podcast. So we'll just go ahead and you can go ahead and say what your underrated movie is, Rachel, and then I'll say my underrated, and then we'll go over towards the overrated category and explain why we feel this way about these movies. So, Rachel, what's your underrated film?
My underrated film is Mary Poppins Returns. And I don't know what the Rotten Tomatoes was on this, but I feel like most everybody was very meh on it. I actually gave it a perfect score. I loved this movie. I absolutely just thought it was magical. I loved the songs. I loved the choreography. I thought the story had real heart. I was invested in the characters, and I thought that it did enough difference to, be its own thing and have its own unique songs and own unique um, characters. And obviously, Mary's the same, but I loved all the casting. I thought it was delightful. I don't know. I just thought it was a wonderful time in the cinemas.
I
And
remember
I was
seeing it.
bummed that it didn't do better.
Uh,
Yeah.
I remember seeing it in theaters, and I remember gratefully enjoying it, but for some odd reason, I really did not like the ending, if I were to
Mm,
be honest. I think it mostly has to do with the villains. That's probably the biggest problem that I would have with Mary Poppins Returns. It's just like they have these big mustache twirly villains that don't want them to have like some property for money. And I don't
mhm.
remember what the story was about, but I remember at the end they were gonna go off and say like, well, things just don't always happen the way that they would want to, and then they would still have happiness in their lives and they would move on towards something else. And what I remember is that at the last minute they said, "Oh wait, there's something within this paper that says like we can actually get exactly what
Yeah.
we would want." And then they have like this whole chase scene, and then the villains are saying like, "Do whatever you can to stop them." And it made me feel like it turned me off really towards the realism that I usually feel whenever I see like at least the first Mary Poppins and what this movie was going for, at least with the end. But then they decided to like at the last minute cut that off, and then also exclaim that Mary Poppins is real, and then have like these other real experiences of people flying in the air with balloons. And while visually nice to look at, it's like I don't know how I feel about
I
that.
think that scene at the end was kind of an homage to Let's Go Fly a Kite at
Yeah.
the end of the movie, and then the whole sort of run on the bank at the end of Mary Poppins, the original, um, that
Hmm.
they were kind of trying to do their own sort of spin on that, on the run on the bank. But I can understand why. I mean, instead of it being a story about a man kind of finding his family, which is the first movie. In this one, it's kind of more a man um, who feels like he's letting his family down. Like so, the first one is a man who just is kind of the opposite. Is taking his family for granted, not caring about them enough, and he learns by the end to value his family. Whereas in this one, I felt like the message was he almost worries too much about his family. He's so burdened by it, by his family, and they love him. He sort of learns that they love him regardless, even if they lose the house, even if that they
Yeah.
love him. And yeah, it's true. I can see that they, it's kind of a happy ending when they find the banknote,
Hmm.
that will save everything, and there's a happy ending at the end. I can see that. But I don't know, it really worked for me. I just thought it was so sweet, and I loved the music and I loved the dancing. And but I said it in my review. It's one of my favorite reviews I've ever written, that I felt like when I was watching it that it was a film that Walt would have loved. That I
Yeah.
could picture, sitting on Main Street, USA in Disneyland watching Mary Poppins
Yeah.
Returns.
I do agree. I did enjoy this movie, and I do think it's still solid, even with like the ending. That, of course, I
Yeah.
didn't like the ending, but
Yeah.
it
That's
was
fair. I mean, it's
really
fair.
nice to see 2D animation in theaters
Oh yeah, that
again.
too.
That was really nice.
Mhm.
I kind of want to see more of that in future Disney films if we can, but I don't know. They're
Yeah.
probably gonna stick with like 3D
And I
animation.
don't know if I would give it a perfect score now, but I still really like it. I think it's a really good
Yeah,
movie. So,
yeah, that's a nice pick. Um, for my underrated, and maybe some people would definitely disagree with this, but it's an Adam Sandler film, and I
uh-huh.
would suggest that Click is not as bad as people
Yeah,
think it
I
is.
agree with
I
that
think that,
actually.
and it mostly has to deal with the last third act. And if you watch like all of the other stuff, like the typical Adam Sandler shtick, where he does all of his usual jokes, then maybe that would be annoying for some people. But for others that tend to like Adam Sandler films that have those type of jokes and are not necessarily bothered by it, I would say that I would recommend them to watch this movie because there's a lot of heart in here. And Adam Sandler usually does this with his movies. I recognize this, where he likes to take in very meaningful messages about what it de- deconstructing your desires, or at least decreasing them, and go for something even though you would might not think is that attracted for you. It's still very worth it, and you gain a lot more towards it. This is something, and I think Click executes that kind of ideology to the best. It really does talk about how you should spend a lot more time with your family, how things don't always last, and you don't know how fast time can move. And the way they executed that in the second half was like very heartbreaking for Adam Sandler. I think it's one of his more better performances that he portrayed, and I really want to see him do more movies like this in the near future, even though he would probably do his usual stick of like, I don't know, Grown Ups 3 or something like that. But I really like the ambition, and I was thoroughly surprised with what he did in that second half. I mean, I watched this randomly with my mom because we were like, oh, let's just watch a random Adam Sandler movie, and then when she saw that last third, she almost welled up in tears of the surprise with what happened with Adam Sandler and the situation with his family and everything that was going on. And I thought it was handled beautifully, and it also has mes- a message in here about second chances, and don't waste that opportunity when you do have a second chance to do something meaningful with your life. So I I really liked what Click did, at least in terms of the second half of the movie with what it did. The first half with its typical jokes, it's typical Adam Sandler stuff, but it's definitely a movie I would recommend some people to watch and give a chance.
Yeah, I'd actually agree. I mean, I'm definitely not the biggest Sandler person, but of his films, it's definitely one of the more enjoyable ones with a nice message and nothing too like annoying or offensive or like it's a pretty cute movie.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So
I agree.
what's your pick for overrated?
My overrated one best picture. We got the Oscars coming up. It won best
Hmm.
picture. I don't think it deserved it at all. I think it was one of the worst of the nominees for that year. And it's Birdman.
Hmm.
Birdman in Array 2. I think it looks beautiful. It's got some great long takes, but long takes do not a good movie make. You need more than that. And I just really did not like the script, particularly really heavy-handed moments like when he goes and talks to the critic. Ugh, it was so grown worthy to me. And I don't know, I just think it's style over substance. I don't like it. The ending is so cringe. I mean, and I every female character is a shrew and terrible in the movie. And the and I get that's part of the like we're seeing it through an unreliable narrator where it's from his perspective. I understand that, but it doesn't mean that I find the movie particularly enjoyable to watch when every single woman is just shouting at him the whole time, and then it culminates with this critic that I just thought was such a grown worthy character, and we're supposed to feel, I guess, sorry for this guy when he's had time and time and time and time again to, to make his life uh, matter, and he's I don't know. I just don't have any sympathy for him, and I just find all the characters insufferable, and I just don't like it. I do not think it is good at all, except for the one takes.
Yeah, I think like I only saw this movie once, and I remember really liking it, but it was only for the sake of it being in one take, or
Yeah.
the appearance of being in one take.
And it
And
gets a lot of, I think, praise too because it's like an artsy take on the superhero. It's like it's commenting on the superhero movies. But what is it really saying that's so
yeah,
brilliant? Just because he played a superhero character in the past,
hmm
that's it. It doesn't really have anything interesting to say about superhero movies, I don't think, or blockbusters or movies or movie making or acting. It's just about this insufferable man who is I don't know, and the horrible women who surround him.
Yeah, this movie is pretty hazy to me because again, I don't really remember a lot of what happens in here. I
Yeah.
remember liking the acting or the performances. I think everyone did a good job in the way that the movie was shot. I mean, have you seen the movie 1917? Is that what it's
Yeah.
called? That's
Not
a
a lot
movie
of
that
long
is in
takes.
one take, and that's a movie that's been like in a very long take. And I think
Well, even
comparing
Black
this
Panther
one,
uses a lot of one takes.
yeah, even comparing like movies like 1917, that was a lot more effective because doing it in one take serves
Hmm.
a better purpose rather than like something
Yeah.
like Birdman, which is talking about
Or
theater
Children of
plays.
Men. That one has some really good one takes. Children of Men.
Okay.
I don't know. I just don't think it's that great. I haven't seen it in a long time, so it's a little fuzzy, but I just thought, I cannot believe this beat Boyhood. I can't believe that it beat Grand Budapest Hotel. Um,
Yeah, I think a lot of people. I think some people were pretty upset when that movie was
yeah.
won.
I felt like I was the only one at the time,
Yeah,
but a lot of people have kind of come around, I feel like, on it. It's not very good.
which usually happens with movies.
Yeah.
Okay, so for me and my overrated, and I guess since this kind of ties into what we're talking about, which is like Pixar, um, I and I'm not saying that this movie was like awful. I personally find Toy Story 4 to be a little overrated. I
Hmm.
didn't think it was like in terms of like the Toy Story trilogy and how it ended within the third film. I did react the same way that a lot of people did when I heard that there was a Toy Story 4. Why? Why are we gonna have like a Toy Story 4 and just like continue onward when Toy Story 3 already ended pretty much all fine and good? But then I heard like positive reviews and said like this movie is actually really good, and I was genuinely excited. I wanted to see how good the movie was, and when I saw it, I was oddly enough underwhelmed because I thought that the movie was going to be really good or something. At least with a movie that I'm used to seeing in Toy Stories, I find that this was mostly about Woody's character and his journey with what's going on with him, and not necessarily with Jesse or Buzz. I felt like these characters were severely like sidetracked and they weren't given much attention. It was mostly just about like Woody and then Bo Peep and everything that was going on with them. And I like it when I see all of the characters group up together and do something more with them. And I also think like for a movie that was supposed to be like the end to Woody's story arc and the whole gang and how he's supposed to move on to like other stuff, it didn't feel earned. I feel like maybe you could have done that with like Toy Story 5, but not really with Toy Story 4. I think like you needed a little bit more than just saying like this is going to be the end and he's like not really going to stay with like all of the other toys, and I forgot what the girl's name was. I can't remember the
With
girl's
Bo
name.
Peep.
Not Bo Peep, like the daughter
Oh,
that plays with
Bonnie.
Bonnie. Okay,
Yeah.
Bonnie. Uh,
I get that. For me, I did really enjoy this. I felt like I there was something that always kind of bothered me, the idea that like they're just going to be in this circle of constantly being played with and then forgotten and played with and forgotten, played with and forgotten for like eternity. And so I think what they were trying to do was to give some kind of like closure to that cycle, right? And maybe they didn't execute it perfectly, but I kind of I felt like, oh yeah, that was something I always wondered about, and I just loved Forky. I thought Forky was so funny.
yeah, there's this movie is definitely cute, and I think like in terms of animation, this is definitely the best looking out of any of the other Toy Story movies.
Yeah,
But I don't know, like
but I can see your points. I
it's
can.
still underwhelming to see like all these characters, and we're ending Woody's story arc, and we haven't really seen them on screen that much. And
Yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, it is definitely a Woody story, not as much the other characters. So that's fair. That's fair.
yeah,
So yeah, I get it.
yeah, but
It's hard to have an unpopular opinion against both DC and Pixar.
It is. It's
These
very
big
hard.
franchises that people feel so close to their hearts.
Not just that, but like
It's
Star
tough.
Wars, Christopher
Star
Nolan
Wars.
movies, all of these other things, like
Hmm.
people would go very hardcore if you have an exact opposite opinion of whatever it is that they have to say.
Right.
But that's what happens when you disagree with people. It doesn't mean that, I, again, like I would like to do the best that I can on this YouTube channel and on this podcast to see if we could be able to come to like, even if we like agree to disagree, we'd be able to come to understand where certain people come from and how we're able to understand them.
Yeah.
Whether or not we like or dislike a movie, that's the only thing that I would like to do. So that's my take on it when you have people disagreeing with you, even if you like I'm very curious to see if somebody who doesn't necessarily like The Godfather, that has like everybody loving the movie, and a lot of people say that it's like cinematic masterpiece. If there's somebody out there that doesn't necessarily care for it or like it, I would like to know why they don't really care for it. I mean, maybe they would just simply say, "Oh, I just didn't like it. It's just not my thing." But if somebody does have an elaborate explanation on why they don't feel like the movie is that great, I'm very curious to see it.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so that's gonna do it for this episode. Thank you, Rachel, for joining in and talking about movies, talking about Turning Red in the Batman, and about like people disagreeing. We got some like interesting stuff to talk about in here, but yeah,
Yeah.
thank you so much for joining in.
It was so much fun. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and also you can check out like her reviews down in the description box below. I for Turning Red in the Batman as well. All of her other stuff would be down in the description box below. But go ahead and tell everybody else what you usually do on social media and all what your job occupation is.
Yeah, so I'm a freelance film critic and I work as a social media manager, I guess, as well. So you can find me at Rachel's Reviews, all of her social media, iTunes, YouTube, and on Rotten Tomatoes. So check that all out. And then also check out the Hallmarkies podcast. Got weekly recaps, plus interviews, plus lots of fun stuff, all things rom com and Hallmark and holiday. So we have a lot of fun over there. And so, yeah, it's a lot. We have a good time.
Yeah. So, anyways, thank you all so much who actually joined in and wanted to listen. Thank you all so much who are listening to the archive version of this podcast episode. Be sure to subscribe if you like to find more content like this in the near future, or if you would like to see any of the other videos that I create. Specifically like the reacting to negative reviews that I usually do on this video series, which you probably would see Rachel's opinions on some specific movies. And who knows, maybe I would do like a positive review series, and maybe you would get to see hers on an unpopular opinion. So yeah, but with that out of the way, thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll be sure to see you in the next video.
Bye.